So the steel that I'm using for the head of this mace is just 5.5mm mild steel. So here I have a finished spike ground to its final profile. So I'm just going to be taking this marker and tracing on the outside of it. So now that I have all four of these cut out, I have one of these ground down to its final shape. And so now what I'm going to be doing is just stacking all of these, clamping them together with this clamp, and then I'm going to clamp this clamp down on a table and then use my angle grinder to get all the dimensions of these to exactly the same dimensions as this one. So now I'll be putting a bevel on all the edges just like I did with this one. Now I'll just tack on each one of these with a little bit of glue. That way they won't fall over while I'm welding. So now that I have this cut in half, it's now time to prepare the mold. So on the first mold attempt with the skull, you'll notice that I cut the skull along a different axis, and this is because when I pulled out the skull the first time, it had some overhang, so it pulled out some of the sand with it, and so that completely ruined the mold, so I had to restart. But basically what I'm doing is just putting some of this green sand over it, and just getting the mold shape within the sand, so then I can cast it. The special thing about this sand is that it's oil-based sand, so it'll hold its shape really well. So now I flip over the box, and you don't want to have any space in the box like that. You want to fill it all up with sand, otherwise when you pack it down it's going to ruin the mold. Also, the white stuff on there is baby powder so that the mold comes out of the sand easier. So now I just put on some super glue and super glue on the other half of the skull. Now I put on the second half of the box and the second half of the skull on it. And I also have a tube that I put next to the skull. And now when the skull is aligned correctly, I start to fill it up with sand again. And I had to use 2 different types of sand because I didn't have enough of the green sand type. So now what I'm doing is just carving some channels for the aluminum to flow down from that hole into the mold. Also poke some air holes so that some air can escape, but on one air hole I drilled it on the wrong side of the mold, so when I pour the aluminum, some of it comes out the bottom. You also want to make sure that you have your mold on a flat surface. I was originally going to do this out of brass, but I ended up doing it in aluminum. So as you can see, the aluminum at the bottom starts to pour out, and that was because of the misdrilled air hole. So the cast went pretty well, so now I just have to clean everything up. I plan on making a video in the future going more in depth on the details on how to make a mold. So now we need to drill one hole into the bottom of the skull and into the end of the handle. I'm just going to be cutting off the ends of this nail right here. So overall this weapon is really useless, but I had a fun time making it, and I also got to practice my welding, and I got to use some new green sand which I ordered, and overall it turned out really well. Also, the pumpkins in this video were not wasted and were given to my chickens. Thanks guys for making it to the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed this build, and if you have an idea, then leave a comment for what I can potentially do next. Also subscribe because next week I have a video coming out on how to make this hatchet.